like to bring to order the Centerfield City Council meeting of Tuesday, February 19th, 2019, and ask you to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our apologies for starting a little bit late. The interviews we had for the Centerfield Fire Commission went a little longer than we expected, so please accept my apologies. Closed session, none. Open time for public expression. That is, anyone that wishes to address us on items that are not on this evening's agenda. Now would be the time to do so. We, of course, can't take action upon your comments, but certainly glad to and receptive to those comments that you wish to present. So, anyone? Close. And come back for the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I don't have a long report this evening. I did, though, just want to do a couple minutes on two items that are very urgent that we're working on right now that the Council has already seen once each. And I want to make sure that the council and community knows that we're working on these things and they'll be coming back. They're among the highest priority things that staff are working on, which is the Wildfire Prevention Action Plan and the Mandatory Mediation and Just Cause Ordinances. So they're not on the agenda tonight, as you know, but that's not because we're not diligently working on them and trying to get them back to the council as soon as we possibly can. The wildfire prevention, we've been getting a lot of public input, been doing a series of public meetings, getting input in person and also over social media and through our website. And we're taking all of that input and we're making revisions to the plan, also reorganizing the plan a little bit because it was 37 very important points, but we're trying to group them and categorize them a little bit to make the plan a little bit more readable, and also add costs or cost estimates to each of those points. So our target date right now is our second meeting in March, just to give us enough time to complete that and bring that back. And then on the mandatory mediation and just cause ordinance, that's also something that's an extremely high priority for the staff, as I know it is the council. And the city council designated a subcommittee at the last meeting, and we're working on setting up a meeting for next week on that and plan on bringing that back as soon as we can to the council. So those are just two items that we're working on that are quite urgent and are making their way back to the council in the next couple meetings. Thank you.
And thank you, Jim, and thanks for your effort on these too, as long as many other things you're involved in. So thanks so much for that effort. Any questions? I would then like to take a little bit out of order and address item 6A, detachment request, sharing agreement with the town of Ross for 400 Upper Toyon Drive, and then we'll return to remaining items. But this item, I understand from the staff, will be held by way of table to an indefinite date. Is that correct, Mr. City?
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Mayor. We heard from the applicant, whose attorney's present, that this timing was inconvenient. The city neglected to clear the date with the property owner, and so what we'd like to request and recommend that the council do at this time is move to continue the item, in this case not to a date certain, but rather to a date to be mutually arranged with the applicant and their counsel.
Fine, thank you. Any public comment with regard to this item? Seeing none, return for a motion to that effect.
I move that we postpone, as indicated, item 6A.
Second.
Second, roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy. Aye. Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 3-0, and we'll now go on to the consent calendar, of which we have items 4A through 4E. E2. Any comments with regard to the consent items? Anyone from the public wish to address us on any of the consent items before we take action? Seeing none, we'll close and come back for a motion with regard to these consent items.
I move that we adopt the consent agenda.
And second.
Move in second, roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy. Aye. Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, the matter carries 3-0, and now we'll turn to the fun stuff. Retirement ceremony. for our canine RS. And I would ask the chief to join us at the podium. Chief, maybe you want to read this. Why don't you read this?
I had a feeling you'd ask me that. This is Aris. He's not retiring because he has no energy. And this is Phil Melodia, Aris's handler for the last 5 or so years, I would say. So this is, usually the mayor reads this, but I'm having the honor of reading this for Canine Aris. Whereas after over 6 years of devoted service to the city of San Rafael, Canine Aris is retiring. His employment with the city started in 2003 as one of 2 San Rafael police canines. Upon joining the department, he successfully completed a 5-week canine patrol class and a 5-week narcotics detection class. He immediately became a valued member of the department, and in 2014, along with his handler, successfully passed canine SWAT school and joined the department's SWAT team. He was deployed hundreds of times during his career for tasks including locating hiding criminal suspects, locating suspects in burglaries and assaults, searching for narcotics, and safely clearing buildings and vehicles. He also assisted the Marin County Major Crimes Task Force in locating narcotics related to large-scale organized crime, narcotics trafficking, and he was the main attraction at many community events, including National Night Out, Camp Chance, school career fairs, the Citizen Police Academy, and neighborhood meetings. His presence at calls for service provided safety for each officer at every call to which he was sent, and this is the most important part. During his tenure as a San Rafael Police canine, Aris was always a good dog. So this is the official thing that's signed by the council. I just want to say a couple words. Having a canine or canines in the department is a huge force multiplier. They can do things safer and not putting the officers at risk. We don't want to put them at risk, but sometimes we have to put them in front to go search a car where someone might be in it not coming out, or a building, or just finding things that we, obviously with our sense of smell and what we can do, cannot do. So he is a wonderful guy. He lives with the Melodia family who are here today. He is retiring and going to live with the family and be basically a dog now. Not just a canine, police canine, but a dog. So Phil, and just for the family and for Phil, it's a huge responsibility to be a canine handler. It's 24/7. You're on call at all times. We assist other agencies in our county and anyone around here who needs help. And it's a big deal. So Phil, thank you so much for your dedication to the department, and just treat him really well. I know you always do. The only thing we won't miss is if he's in the car and the radio is keyed, he barks. So dispatch is going to be happy that they don't hear that anymore, but they'll be sad as well. And just kind of as a gift for Aris, this is donated by Rivertown Feed in Petaluma. Sergeant Eberly has a connection. Oh, Sergeant, did I just demote you right in the city council meeting? Lieutenant, very good Lieutenant Eberly, got this for us, and there's some really good stuff that probably dogs like a lot, so there you go. And Phil, do you want to say anything? Okay.
The chief mentioned that normally I present, and she's got a little work to do, because I always shake hands with the recipient. And you're on training. But you'll get it next time, I'm sure. You guys okay? All right.
Want to get a picture with everyone?
Yeah, congratulations. I wish I have that much energy when I retire, right? Jeez, holy cow.
I'll come up here, sit down, I'll kneel down. You guys like that? Come up behind me.
We're not carrying drugs, are we? Okay. Seriously. Now, to further the celebration, I think we have cake, right? Yes. All right. I want everybody to join us.
looking for
Yeah, exactly. Like to reconvene the Centerfield City Council meeting with item 5B, presentation Northgate Pop-Up Mall. And I think we have a presentation. Yes.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Henry Bankhead, Interim Library Director with the City of San Rafael. I'm joined by Jamie Poirier, Circulation Supervisor with the City of San Rafael, and Bonnie White, Deputy County Librarian with Marin County Free Library. We'd like to show a short video followed by a brief presentation.
I like it so far.
We are looking for new locations for our library and planning for the future. And this is one of our experiments, trying out a different location, bringing library services, including books, and a 3D printer to meet our residents where they are.
All kinds of interactive stuff in here. 3D printing, virtual sandbox, virtual reality, ability to show and showcase our electronic resources. And if that wasn't cool enough, we also have books, movies, audiobooks, playaways, computers for people to use, people to help you find all that stuff. So it's kind of like public library meets the Apple Store for free.
We're having wonderful experiences with our patrons here with the VR. It always is a draw for them. We've had to clean the window outside from the little nose marks of kids looking in, and that makes me happy too. So all in all, for me, this is a great success because our patrons love it.
This rounds out our library services to the community, so I'm very pleased that we have it for a period of time. And we'll see whether or not you should maintain one at this location or nearby after we've operated here for a period of time.
Part of our ongoing efforts to reach people where they're at and to provide services in a way that work best for the community.
It's been so much fun for us to put it together. All the materials on the shelves are things we took from our distribution center where nobody could check them out or use them, and it makes me very happy having them displayed in this beautiful space where people can just come and pick them up.
And we couldn't say anything more about this working with San Rafael Public Library. They're an awesome group of people. It was a can-do attitude. We opened this in 7 days, which is a spectacularly fast speed. So I hope you'll come by. This is a place that's here, not just for this month, but in the future.
Nice.
So I'd like to thank the filmmaker Alejandro Palacios from XR Marin. He's one of the partners at the mall pop-up. I'm going to provide a little background about how this came to pass. Jamie's going to give some stats and Bonnie's going to tell us more. So a little more than a year ago, Merlone Geyer Partners bought the Northgate Mall, and at that time they did a survey for their surrounding community where a library feature was weighted heavily, and so the community said something to the effect that they would like to see a library in the mall. They approached us at the San Rafael Library a little more than a year ago. We had a discussion, and then we kind of held that thought. Fast forward to just before the holidays this past year, December 2018. I was still toying with the idea, having kind of discussed it as part of our new library facility planning process as a way to fast prototype what service in North San Rafael could look like. I reached out to Danielle O'Leary, who got me in touch with the right person at the mall, who was very excited to have us come and do something there. I talked to Sarah Jones, and she was very excited, and they just happened to have about 20,000 items that they weren't using. So we formed a quick partnership where we would provide the bulk of the staffing, they would provide the collection, they're providing the internet service, and away we went in less than 7 days. And we have great stats to prove how well it's working.
Mayor and Council. This is Jamie Poirier. I am the circulation supervisor here at the downtown San Rafael Library, and I'm happy to provide some numbers because I think that numbers can help us provide the context for how well this project is doing. To date, we have issued 198 library cards at this facility. That is third in all of the county for the same time period, and roughly 10 times the amount that we have seen at some of the smaller and equal-sized branches also in the county. We have 7,657 items at that location. Of that number, 6,342 items have actually checked out. That is 83% of the collection. What's interesting also is that 12% of the collection up there is focused on Spanish language materials, and of that 12%, over 30% has checked out, which tells us we're hitting a prime demographic for the community that we're trying to serve. Lastly, I just want to share that the numbers of items owned is close to the Pickleweed location, but the numbers for library cards issued far, far exceed that location for the same time. Bonnie?
Mayor and Council, I'm Bonnie White. I send you greetings from Sarah Jones, our library director, who's in Texas tonight, so I get to be here. My pleasure. I want to say a little bit about why Marin County Free Library thought this was a great idea to partner up with our friends from San Rafael. We have a focus on equity right now. The county does, and the county library does, and I know the San Rafael Library does as well. And so the idea was, instead of waiting for people to come to us, that we would go where they were and see how that worked. And so far, the evidence is that it's just working spectacularly. All through the Christmas season, we had families coming in to get library cards and take home books who had never been in a library before, didn't know how it worked. We're providing program services from Marin County Free Library, so our children's librarians are going to do story time with groups of kids who've never been to story time before, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful way to introduce people to the services we can offer. The pop-up library at Northgate is just so bright and inviting, and it's the library of yes. If you'd like a library card, we'll get you one. We don't charge overdue fees. It's a friendly and fun place. As you know, you've been there, so thank you.
We have been there, and it was fun to be there. As I recall, though, and I'm curious, at that time, when we got the ribbon, I thought it was for a fairly short period of time. What's that timeline look like at this point?
So we're still trying to work out a sustainable staffing solution for that location, given our other 2 locations in the city. So we were able to extend the month-by-month agreement through the end of March. We have an indemnity agreement, and we're trying to work out an MOU with the county that would be more durable for a longer period, and that's a work in progress as we speak.
With those numbers, how can we miss, right?
Well, you would think so.
Well, that's wonderful, and to work together like that, I think is quite an accomplishment in 7 days, my goodness. But to extend beyond that is something that's special. And as I mentioned, sort of my impression when I was there, it's a good testing opportunity to see how well it'll be accepted or to what extent it would be accepted, because we are talking about several locations to expand our libraries, and this would be one of those locations. But it maybe this will provide an opportunity to prove itself. So thanks for helping us with that and
Pleasure.
making such a success. Questions? I'm going to ask the public. Anyone from the public wish to address us on this item? See none, I'll return. And concluding comments.
It's just been such a pleasure working with our friends from Centerfield. We just share the same values of excellent customer service and reaching out to underserved communities, and it's really worked. So far, so good. We keep getting letters from people begging us not to close. To tell you, there's a little pressure.
But your comment's right on. It is a partnership between the 2, and that doesn't always happen, the division being what it is. So this is a good example of how it should work, and so thanks for helping us with that. It's been great. Okay, thank you very much. I think this is presentation, so there's no action to be taken. So therefore, we'll move on to item 6B under other agenda items, short-term rentals.
Mayor, before Paul starts, I think you've been introduced to Paul Jensen here on my left, but maybe not.
Same on occasion.
But maybe not to Ethan Guy, who works with Paul in the Community Development Department. This is his first council presentation before you on short-term rentals, and he's working on a number of different things for community development. Another one that will be back in front of you shortly will be regarding flavored tobacco issues. So he's take on any subject matter, and tonight it's short-term rentals.
And thanks for being here with us.
Well, thank you.
You too.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor Phillips and council members. And I was going to make a nice introduction with Ethan as well, but Jim did a good job here. I do want to let you know that Ethan comes from the city of Oakland, and the nice part about him being assigned to this topic is that he dealt with this topic in Oakland, so he comes with some skills in some of his research. And before Ethan gives a presentation on short-term rentals, and by the way, this is an informational report, I'd like to set the stage with some background. Actually, this topic came up initially several years ago when the City Council was reviewing the Junior Second Unit Ordinance. One of the concerns that came up was that, and we knew very little about short-term rentals at that time, the concern was that there could be a potential impact to our permanent housing stock. And so we were asked, the City Council directed us to monitor short-term rental activity and also not only monitor the number of short-term rentals that we have, but any complaints that we get. Right now, we do not regulate, tax, or enforce short-term rentals. So that's where we are with the starting point. Subsequent to that initial direction, we hired Host Compliance. Host Compliance is a code enforcement and short-term rental data service that is available. This particular service is used by many cities in tracking short-term rentals. We have a contract with them that gives us access to their database. With that access, we get information on total number of short-term rentals and actual location. And this is based on active rentals, and they use Yelp to actually track the location, which is quite interesting. And what we found since we initially started monitoring this activity is there has been growth in short-term rentals. Originally, it was tracked at about 150. As of the staff report, we have 286 that are active. One thing I did want to mention, we've also tracked complaints and inquiries. We've actually had few in the past 3 years, about a dozen, mostly inquiries. Last August, if you may recall, the Community Development Department gave a presentation on broad housing topics and issues, and the takeaway was the City Council asked us to do follow-up on 4 topic areas. This was one of the topic areas, which is the purpose of the informational report this evening. With that, you will find in the report there were 2 white papers that were prepared. One specifically covers general trends and permitting and taxing, and the second focuses on best practices for enforcement. And so a lot of the information in the report comes from those 2 white papers. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Ethan to provide a more in-depth presentation. I do want to mention that we have 3 different options that are before you this evening to consider and to provide direction on. So Ethan.
All right, thank you, Paul. So as Paul discussed, I'm just going to give a very high-level overview of what's in the report. Happy to dive into wherever you guys want to. So first up, looking at the existing conditions, in 2018 we had 286 active short-term rental listings. As Paul mentioned, that's an increase of from 150 in 2016 when we first started monitoring. The largest kind of percentage of those listings themselves are at 75 listings in 3-bedroom, single-family, entire home properties. The listings themselves are pretty equally geographically distributed across the city. There are slight concentrations in the West End, Gersel Park, and Dominican neighborhoods, but that's also where there's the highest amount of housing. Over the last 3 years, as Paul mentioned, we've only received a few complaints, less than a dozen. In terms of best practices, which is really what the meat of the report was trying to look at, as Paul mentioned, we looked at two white papers that we had commissioned for the Community Development Department. And what they found was really that most successful and effective short-term rental policies have a few main policy designs. The first one being passive complaint-based enforcement rather than a prohibition or banning outright of a short-term rental. Additionally, easy and streamlined online permit application and tax remittance process really makes sure that people sign on, they are active, and that they participate in the program. Most jurisdictions have to expand their TOT ordinance to include short-term rentals. Usually that's in the hotel and motel definition. They also adopt an ordinance with clear requirements for hosts to be able to comply. That's trying to make sure that whatever's in that ordinance itself is very clear and direct, and that there's some transparency for the hosts themselves to know how to be in compliance. Also, at onset, there's sufficient staffing to ensure enforcement. And then finally, jurisdictions often collaborate with the platforms, that's Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway, as part of that registration and TOT collection and remittance. Additionally, staff looked at fee and fine options to consider. For those fees, there's really four main streams for fees. The first being a registration fee. This is the most common. It's mostly just to try to recoup and do cost recovery for those first-year costs. This is very similar to how we currently run our massage program. Additionally, there's a renewal fee that's often charged to recoup ongoing program costs. That's usually significantly less than that registration fee. There's also business licenses that are used, and that's mostly because hosts are operating as a business. They need to have a valid business license. This fee is usually included or can be included in the registration and renewal fees. Some jurisdictions either charge that separately or only charge a business license. Finally, a less common fee is having a platform fee charged directly to Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway to be able to operate within the city limits. In terms of fines, there's really three main fine options to consider. The first one is utilizing an existing fine schedule. Oftentimes, since they're using the hotel and motel definition within the TOT ordinance, they just use the existing hotel-motel fine. Additionally, some jurisdictions use a two-tiered fine schedule. So there's one fine schedule that they apply to registered STR units, and that's usually a hotel-motel. But then, in order to kind of push for registration, they'll offer a higher fine schedule for those unregistered short-term rental listings. Finally, while it's not necessarily a fine itself, most jurisdictions, as well as option that's supported by Airbnb, is a 3-strike ban. So if a host receives 3 fines or does not resolve 3 complaints, they can be removed from the platform or through the program itself. One thing to note with fines, right now, currently in San Rafael, you can only have a $500 fine per violation. So with all this in mind, we looked at 3 main options. The first one being the status quo. That's our current system. Right now, we just maintain an existing address identification with that contract with host compliance. We passively monitor short-term rental activities. In terms of enforcement, we respond to complaints, but not much else. In terms of revenue for option 1, we don't have a TOT collection or program fee, but we do receive some revenue through code enforcement complaints and citations. In terms of option 2, this is a minimal enforcement option. One thing to note, how we modeled this was really to try to have the minimal amount of enforcement to get the optimum amount of TOT revenue. So really, most of the administrative tasks are going to be operated through a compliance monitoring software. That could be host compliance, that could be another product. But through that system, what we're doing is we'd be monitoring address identification, compliance monitoring, doing the permitting and registration on that platform, as well as rental activity and monitoring, tax collection, and complaint hotline. So what the complaint hotline is, it's a 24/7 hotline that is staffed by the software company. If there's a complaint, they would call in directly to that number and not through the city's phone service. With that, hosts would complete the registration, do a self-inspection, and fee payment all online or on their mobile phone. In terms of enforcement, Staff would respond to unresolved complaints from that hotline, as well as anything that might be escalated that would need an actual code enforcement officer to respond. Additionally, staff would perform an annual audit of the documentation that would be submitted. In terms of revenue, there would be TOT collection and remittance, a cost recovery and program fee, including a business license, and then that online payment of fees and TOT, as well as potential program fines. Finally, the third option that we modeled was a complete STR ban. Similar to option 2, there would be an acquisition of an additional software to help identify, monitor, as well as have a complaint hotline through that system to do the administrative process. Where it differs is that staff would actively monitor STR activity, as well as actively respond to all complaints and addresses identified through the system. In terms of revenue, since there's not really a program, there wouldn't be TOT collection or a program fee. And then finally, there would be some possible program fines that we could have some TOT, have some revenue recovery. So this is a big one, lots of numbers. But ultimately, what we did is we modeled 3 potential TOT revenue scenarios: a low-end estimate, a mean estimate, and then a high-end estimate. And the reason why we did have a split in terms of what that revenue is supposed to be is because we don't actually know right now how much people are making. It's all based upon projections and estimations. So we wanted to be as upfront as possible that there is a fairly wide range in what the TOT revenue could be. So with that, we estimated that for options 1 and 3, the program will not have a positive balance under any scenario due to the lack of TOT collection or a program fee. However, for option 2, staff estimates that in all scenarios where a program fee would be charged, the program would have a positive balance that would be equal to the TOT collection. And that's essentially just because that program fee would be cost recovering. If there's a scenario in which no fees are charged, and the reason why we're including that is because some jurisdictions choose to charge a program fee that's not fully cost recovering. Under that scenario, option 2 would have a positive year 1 and ongoing balance under the mean and high estimate, and option 2 would have a negative year 1 and ongoing balance under the low estimate. So with all that in mind, there were 3 main conclusions that we came to. The first one is right now the status quo really has not been problematic to date. Due to the wide range in the TOT revenue projections, staff does not project a significant increase in net revenue from an STR program. TOT revenue is unlikely to offset program costs without a program fee. And then finally, if council does decide to move forward with an STR regulation, staff would support option 2, but would be strongly opposed to option 3.
Well, excellent presentation. I like the summary particularly because it matches some of my notes, so good job, I would suggest. Questions of staff? Andrew.
Thank you for the presentation in the staff report, very informative, but somewhat intriguing in what it doesn't present by way of data, and that is, and it's what, in going back to the context that Paul Jensen provided, that prompted us to take a look at this a couple of years ago at the outset, is have we learned from our contract with host compliance over the last couple of years what this is doing, what this phenomenon of short-term rentals is doing to our housing stock? In other words, if we're not seeing, your comment in the report is that the status quo has not been problematic to date. That means it's not been problematic in the sense that there's a lot of community complaints about short-term rentals next door, those sorts of problems. And the numbers would suggest, I think the staff report indicates perhaps 1% of our housing stock falls within the ambit of short-term rentals. But if we continue the status quo, can we expect that we're going to see some displacement of our housing stock and continued migration towards short-term rentals and potentially the loss of housing opportunities to those who are either most in need or would otherwise be served but might have to go elsewhere?
So in terms of a direct correlation between short-term rentals in San Rafael and a change in the housing stock, it's pretty difficult to measure with the data that we currently have from host compliance. However, there's been larger analysis that's been performed on other jurisdictions where they have more robust data. And what those studies have been able to find is that with a 1% increase in Airbnb listings, there leads to a 0.018% increase in rents, as well as 0.026% increase in housing prices. So there is an impact, but it is a very marginal impact based upon what those changes, and that's a nationwide viewpoint.
Thank you. Good question. Mary Beth?
No question.
Okay. You've concluded, and I want to open it public, but my broad question is, because I came to the same conclusion that you have with regard to staff supporting option 2. So I guess my reverse question would be, is there any reason why we would not implement option 2?
One, the uncertainty of the transient occupancy tax carrot here that I think needs to be strongly considered. Since that range is so broad and it's uncertain at this point, my concern is entering into a program where you have fixed costs for expenditures with an unknown amount for revenue. I mean, we could always revisit this or whatever, just like we could always revisit if we decide to do status quo as well, if there's a concern about housing stock impacts. But that, I think that's the primary concern. The other concern, too, is what this will result in, even with minimal enforcement in terms of hands-on city staffing for code enforcement. To be honest, we did look at a more, we did consider and look at another option which would have required more hands-on code enforcement. That means adding staffing, and we can't do that. We just don't have the budget for that. So that's the other level of uncertainty, is how much of this will trickle back in our lap for hands-on enforcement.
And there was one question, a related question I had, which was staffing, and I think you've answered that. I was curious whether or not we would have to add staff to incorporate the second option or not. And you seem to be indicating no. Is that correct?
Well, we have some staff time built into option 2, in-house staff time, for which Ethan has met with Anna Santiago, and Anna's here this evening to respond if there's any questions about the issue of the ability to provide code enforcement with option 2. So there are some hours estimated, annual hours for code enforcement time, but again, it's a bit uncertain. So,
is this something that I'm not suggesting this? I'm just asking. Is there a reason why we couldn't try this, a pilot, if you will, for 6 months or a year or some reasonable period of time before drawing an absolute conclusion, or is this something you're all in and can't reverse?
Well, you can actually do a pilot or revisit this in a year. That's actually not that different than what happened in Sausalito. They've gone back and forth with banning and then regulating, and now they're back to banning. So obviously they've re-looked at this and considered a ban. So that's certainly something we could do if we decide to proceed with any one of these options. So.
And one thing to add on that, there would be some embedded upfront costs and changes that would need to occur in order to implement the program. So changes.
Roughly, what would that be?
Changes to the definition of hotel, motel, to add short-term rentals into the municipal code as well.
What would the cost be? Any idea?
I think, here, let me pull it up.
I mean, just roughly.
Yeah. I had extras just in case you guys asked. Roughly, not including the host compliance services, it would be about $8,300 for those, what we estimate to be those upfront costs.
Okay. Let's open to public. Anyone from the public wish to address us on this item? Please. Good evening.
Homeowners associations provide the first point of contact with resident complaints and work tirelessly to mediate disputes, provide information, education on muni codes, and a plethora of those things. We save multiple hundreds of hours of staff time with our volunteer efforts. And dealing with, I have one example of one single homeowner who is not working with our HOA, who is in our home, has generated 16 police muni code complaints within the last 11 months. So all those other homes, the 265 other homes, are working with us to prevent staff time being spent on these kinds of issues. We're concerned about the financial model of STRs, just like the SLEs, where commercial companies, commercial investors come into the neighborhood and buy properties, taking it out of workforce housing and residential housing and use it for commercial purposes. According to the National Association of Realtors, they remove affordable housing stock for low and moderate income residents and employees and increase existing long-term rental rates. Significantly, we believe that any changes to the zoning law or exemptions, which number 2 provides for, which would be exemptions to the zoning codes and changes to the definition of home occupations, are anathema to the HOAs. Most HOAs have rules about not having a public business in their neighborhoods. We don't want to turn them into commercialized locations. And a lot of us have rules about how a minimum amount of time that a rental can happen. So we would like to go with option 1 and have much more information to work with. I'd like the city to reach out to the HOAs and get our input, sit down and talk to us about how this could possibly work without zoning changes. And the TOT is, I know it's it looks good, but we would really like to make sure that the uptick in the ADUs that Paul has mentioned is not related to SDRs or they're being used. We want the ADUs used as they were intended, to provide workforce housing and as a financial aid for seniors aging in place. So we need more info, and I'd like to see us get more info and more discussion with the HOAs, if possible, before you go ahead and do anything. Thank you.
And thank you. Anyone else? In which case we'll close. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm pretty quick to trigger here, but welcome your comments.
Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Charlie Camella. I live at 94 Jewel Street in Montecito neighborhood. And just a little bit of a background. I did share a letter that perhaps the members received. We share a driveway with our neighbor at 98 Jewel Street. Our neighbor actively rents 2 short-term rentals almost every night, a bedroom in his house and a studio in his back deck. In the past 12 months, he has rented this spaces over 600 nights, a phenomenal number of rentals, and we have records to document that. I'm against short-term rentals, and I feel they should be banned in residential neighborhoods. Here is a few of the reasons. Short-term rentals only benefit 2 groups of people, the host and the transient guest. Neighbors, neighborhoods, and communities do not benefit. Short-term rentals have a negative impact on housing stock, and that was already mentioned. They take away rooms and housing which could be available for the elderly or the low-income groups. It also raises the rental prices in the surrounding housing. Short-term rentals also can affect the value of your home. No one wants a short-term rental next door, and the value of your house will likely go down if you have to disclose that your neighbor is operating a short-term rental. Short-term rentals engage in unfair business practices. They operate like a hotel, motel, or bed and breakfast, but they avoid all the requirements for safety, fire exits, sprinklers, health codes, inspections, habitability, etc. Short-term rentals are detrimental to neighborhoods. There can be excess noise, traffic, crime, loud parties, public nuisance. They frequently pit neighbors against each other. And short-term rentals are not at all consistent with the City of San Rafael's mission statement to enhance the quality of life and provide for a safe, healthy, prosperous, and viable environment in partnership with the community. And lastly, the neighborhood element of the City of San Rafael's general plan specifically requires that all new development in residential neighborhoods are designed to preserve, enhance, and maintain the residential character of the neighborhood and to make them desirable places to live. Certainly, short-term rentals are just the antithesis of preserving the residential character of the neighborhood. Does San Rafael need short-term rentals? The answer is no. Does San Rafael need to provide low-cost lodging for transient guests? The answer is no. I suggest that San Rafael join the 7 of 11 cities in Marin County and ban short-term rentals. After all, neighborhoods are for neighbors, not short-term rentals.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening, Mayor
Good
and
evening.
City Council members. I'm Sean Terheiden of 98 Jewel Street with my wife Cambria. We're former teachers in Marin County. 2.5 years ago, we opened a business which has grown to 12 employees. We could never have taken that risk without the income of our STR. We've had a successful STR for over 2 years now. This separate and private space in our house does not take away any existing housing stock, as it lacks a kitchen. It's tiny and would otherwise remain unused. We have no family in California, and home sharing allows us to meet interesting people while supplementing our income during the difficult startup time of owning a new business. Without this income, we absolutely could not afford to live in this county, which would be devastating, as we're also expecting our first child in about 1 month. The report with which you've been presented contains several options for with STRs. Unfortunately, a couple of proposals have been influenced by a few vocal and angry activists. Our neighbors Charles Comella and Linda Kruger, along with their attorney Len Rifkind. And these proposals are based on emotionally charged and erroneous, misleading information. The Comellas have expended thousands of dollars on their quest to ban Airbnb and short-term rentals because they don't like that they have to see a different car parked in our driveway. To clarify, we don't share a driveway, but rather a section of public right-of-way that leads up to an area in which our guests park on our property, entirely on our property. So we strongly object to regulation of STRs based on some arbitrary proximities to other homes or so-called shared spaces. This would unfairly and financially discriminate against lower-income homeowners with smaller homes or small properties such as condo complexes or homes in dense urban areas. We do support common sense regulation, business licenses, registration, or revenue through TOTs. Also, as San Francisco has successfully implemented, we support regulation on the number of nights a primary home can be rented out as an STR, which would obviously and positively protect the housing stock. Thanks very much.
Thanks for your
Have a
comments.
good night. Thank you.
And congratulations. Anyone else? Good evening.
Hi, I'm Linda Kruger. I'm the neighbor who does not like the Airbnb. We live behind San Rafael High School. I have a direct concern about the short-term rentals and its effect on me. I share a driveway with one other neighbor who, for the past 2 years, has rented Airbnb beginning with one room and then adding a second rental. I've watched this neighbor do unpermitted work to put in a compost toilet and other things to make the spaces habitable. He has an outdoor shower for his guests that drains water down our driveway into the storm drains. According to the county, this is illegal, but San Rafael City allows this. We have strangers coming and going all hours of the day and night, driving around our narrow roads looking for the address. I can see an occasional rental of short-term, but for certain living arrangements. My situation is more extreme, with 2 rentals per night, usually 7 nights per week. This is totally unacceptable. We always felt our home had privacy, and now that is gone. I did not buy my home to live next to a hotel or a KOA with outdoor showers. I can see short-term rentals for certain private, non-conspicuous locations that does not affect or impact the neighbors or neighborhood. What I'm experiencing is the extreme and can grow and happen to others. If the city does not choose to regulate short-term rentals, or I hope they do, I would please at least ban such rentals on shared driveways. This has become a nightmare for us. I mean, he talks about how it helped him save his house. He could have kept his teaching job. He could have done other things. This has just been horrendous. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next person.
Good
Good evening.
Good evening. I am Jennifer Della Santa. I just live up the hill, and I didn't prepare anything formal, but I heard what was happening tonight. And I just wanted to quickly share how having a short-term rental via Airbnb has really benefited my family. As you know, the living expenses in the Bay Area is astronomical. And the only way that we are able to afford to remain in our home is with our fully legal unit that we got permitted through next door, basically, as you know. It has allowed us to also meet very interesting people, and from what I hear, because I've been doing it for about 3 years now, it has actually increased a lot of tourism in this area because these people that come and stay in our home would otherwise not be able to afford to pay for a hotel room because even hotel rooms are very expensive. So I definitely support either option one or option 2. I'm happy to pay for a business license or whatever fee to continue to maintain our rental. And I'll say that my neighbors, zero complaints, and in fact, they stayed in our Airbnb when they had their floors remodeled in our house. And I know that that's perhaps a unique situation, but they think it's kind of cool that we get to have all these people come and they support our endeavors to continue to be their neighbor, if you will. That's it.
And thanks for your comments.
Evening, Mayor,
Hi.
council members. So I just wanted to echo a lot of sentiment that Sean and Jen have already talked about. I think the one point that I wanted to bring up more than anything was the short-term rental that we have, what it's been able to do for our family is my wife, we relocated here about 18 months ago from San Jose, and I work in San Francisco, and she's been able to stay home. We have a 5-year-old daughter, so she's been able to stay home with the income that's come from that, to be able to raise our daughter instead of her having to pick up a second job and then us having to put her in daycare. So the family institution is really big to us because I come from a huge Italian family, and she comes from a large one on her side as well. So the point that I wanted to get more than anything was just that this has helped us tremendously just because she's been able to stay home with our daughter and really spend good quality time with her. And then, you know, as Jen and Sean kind of echoed, you know, recommend option 1 or option 2 as a resident. I have no problem, you know, paying money toward the city to be able to maintain this and keep it going so that way we can keep that family institution running. And I would love to see some of that money go back into the city for, you know, our schools, our roads, our public servants, things like that. So thank you very much.
And thanks for your comments. Anybody else? Close, come back. Tell me a little bit more about the public outreach, indications where that perhaps it's not as complete as some would prefer. What have we done thus far?
In terms of notifications for this meeting,
No, prior to that, leading up to the development of the report and reporting out of that. Has there been discussion within the community?
We had a meeting with the Chamber of Commerce to talk about this topic, and we spoke with several of the homeowners associations, but nothing more formal than that, no. For this meeting tonight, we sent, the notice that we sent out was quite, you know, comprehensive.
Based on the comments that you've heard this evening, I'm wondering if it might be beneficial to all the parties to have more outreach with the community to see if this should be refined further before we make a decision, let's say. What's your opinion, which of course we respect.
Well, frankly, I think that's a good idea, and Kelly London brought up some points that we didn't even consider, and that is there's a lot of heavy lifting that's done by the homeowners association when they deal with issues at a granular level that don't even reach the city. And I'd kind of like to hear about those. So I think that's a really good idea. If we decide to at least any one of these options, we could do that. So
Yeah, we do want to make sure we get it right. So
yeah.
Andrew?
Yeah, I too, Kelly, I'll look at you. Pardon me. I too was very persuaded by some of Kelly's, most of your comments, Kelly. I agree that HOAs do a lot of the work locally within specific neighborhoods to try to ensure conformity consistent with the CCNRs that govern all of the homeowners. And I realize it's sometimes a thankless task, and it can be prohibitively expensive trying to bring one recalcitrant neighbor in line. So very much appreciate why this is difficult for you as a homeowners board member. But I'm a little worried here. I'm afraid that the testimony we have heard from the public, apart from Kelly's comments, has been mostly centered upon the locus of complaints that have emerged from this Jewel Street address or its vicinity. And I don't want that to distract us from the findings we've seen in the staff report and generally the information we've received over the last couple of years, which is, and at the risk of oversimplifying it, we don't appear to be confronted with a problem of any real gravity or significance in the city of San Rafael, although that's not to say that this can't become problematic over time. So when we look at option 1, which is maintain the status quo, or option 2, which is implement a series of solutions, I'm a little worried, to use the hackneyed phrase, that we would be implementing solutions that are chasing a problem that hasn't yet fully defined itself. I'm, in part for that reason, and in part due to the comments that Kelly's made, I think it does behoove us to spend a little more time monitoring the situation, doing the outreach, as the mayor has intimated, to make sure that we appreciate what in fact is going on in the community from the perspective of our HOAs, our individual residents, and then come back in a period of time, whether it's 6 months or 12 months, armed with a little more data and a little more appreciation for what our constituents want, and perhaps then we can make a better reasoned decision on staying the course or implementing, frankly, a new bureaucracy for us to address a concern in the community.
Thank you. Everybody?
I agree that we could use some more additional information. We're searching, though, for a tipping point for when it makes sense to start regulating in this area. I think we're very close to that point, if not there. When I look at this map with all its red dots, it looks like a measles outbreak in Centerfield. It's very clear that in Loch Lomond, as well as in my neighborhood, there are operating short-term rentals. It appears to be a growing phenomenon, and problems or accommodating this phenomenon in our city is best done through a thoughtful and even-handed regulation program. I am particularly moved by the transit occupancy tax. If these services were provided by hotels, we would be collecting a tax on them. By maintaining the status quo, we're in effect exempting them from that tax, and I very much prefer that taxes be even-handedly imposed. The short-term rental owners who have testified here tonight have expressed an openness to common sense regulation and getting a business license and becoming part of the regulatory forum. I think we are, if not there, on the point of needing to move towards implementing something like option 2. Option 3, I think, is very troubling because for probably the same reason that staff is opposed to it. We have no realistic means to enforce any sort of a prohibition. And looking at this chart of red dots, even with our legions of HOA members, and I can tell you that I got my start on the HOA board as well. I know, and I can verify it is indeed thankless. Although, actually, I have to take that back. One time, one guy sent me flowers after I mediated a dispute, solved something. He sent me flowers. It was great. So I was thanked once. But back to this, I think that a thoughtful program that puts us together in a measured way, that brings them into the regulatory fold, so that if there are unpermitted activities going on the site, we can inspect. We have we have a complaint officer. We have a way to regulate this. And finally, I think it will be essential that we set a limit on the number of nights per year that can be accommodated. Those are my thoughts.
Good thoughts. And I agree with the two previous comments. I'm leaning towards option 2, but certainly want to do it in a way that incorporates the thoughts of the community most directly involved. So I think perhaps a revisit of that element would be appropriate. And I must say I'm a little bit jealous because I was president of our homeowners association. I didn't get any flowers. I don't know what the secret is, you know. But in any case, if you're in concurrence, and it sounds as though you are, I think that's the direction perhaps we should go. You agree with that? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, and I do have one other thing I want to mention. So it sounds like for now, status quo, and then we come back in 6 months or so with a report with more information to determine whether we would go to option 2. I did want to mention one other thing that we haven't been able to get too specific on, and Ethan did a very good job in this report distinguishing between a home ownership with a short-term rental and investment properties. And I think we may have the tools to be able to get the numbers for both of those, and also the tools to determine if any of these are, for example, accessory dwelling units, because I think those are a key to determining whether or not our housing stock is impacted by this activity, especially if those numbers continue to climb. So that's, with buying time on doing more research, I think we'll be able to provide that information too.
Okay. I would just like to add, I'm not sure 6 months is necessary, but perhaps your call on that.
And I would encourage you, if you come forward, to have at least a draft or a straw proposal of what exactly you would think would be the best approach.
Yeah. Ethan, good job. Nice presentation, nice report. Excellent job. Is there a motion with regard to this item? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, if I can.
Accept the report.
I move that we accept the report and at the same time direct staff to return with additional information after doing the outreach and research that we've discussed so that we can look at this more closely in or about 6 months to determine whether or not option 2 or some variant thereof or option 3 would be appropriate.
Second.
Second roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 3-0. And thanks everyone for helping us with this this matter. We'll now turn to council members' reports. Any? Okay. In which case, no successor. Therefore, we shall